Hello. Thanks for your visit. Please stay with us. We've got important matters to discuss. We want to give you a look through our lens so that you can see what we see: a welcoming, connected Europe rich with networks, no borders. This view sees archaeology, treasures buried thousands of years ago. It focuses on secular manuscripts and tapestry that had to be hidden away for centuries. Religious materials from the past remain in quantity, but most of the secular record has been destroyed. Archaeology shows that connected Celtic culture flourished across Europe 2,000 years ago. We cannot be bound by writings. Most are the victor's versions. I came, I saw, I conquered. Julius Caesar came. He wasn't already there. He invaded and occupied. Conquerors did not slay Celts by day and build castles by night. No, Celtic men and women built Europe. Conqueror is controlled by division and terror. They start wars, attack women and family, and they tell false stories. They teach subservience and rule by brutality. The foes of our forebears are the same foes today. The Caesars still want to control us. What do? We need to see our oppressors for what they are and realize that they use faith as a sword. Only then can we defang the dragon.
The Celtic world was all across Europe. Today, we often think about the Celts as in Scotland or Ireland or Brittany, but they were all over Europe, and not always do we know them under the name Celt. So, for example, there's the early Iron Age and the late Iron Age, which really are Celtic periods. The early Iron Age refers to the Hallstatt period from about 850 before the current era, BCE. And it's representative of early findings, including those of the Duchess of Mecklenburg in the Austrian town of Hallstatt, where these designs and artifacts were first noticed in an orderly scientific approach. The second Iron Age, or the late Iron Age, is from about 500 BCE and is often called the La Tène period. And again, these designs spread all across Europe and were distinguishable from the earlier Hallstatt period by the more organic nature of the designs. All of these items and designs also followed the spread of ironworking across Europe, which again was part of the Celtic culture.
So tapestry is really the starting point of this study and this adventure that we've been on. And I wanted to just describe our very first forays into the world of tapestry. I just became enamored by tapestry the first time I saw it, in the 15th century tapestry. The Lady and the Unicorn, The Hunt for the Unicorn, the beauty of the verdure, which are the landscape scenes that have such wonderful depictions of trees and rivers and castles, and they're just exquisitely done with mathematical precision and balance. So I thought that one of the best ways to really understand tapestry was to deal in them. So we started a tapestry import business. One of the first trips we took, we went all the way from Sweden and ended up in Hungary. I had done a lot of work with contacting people who were tapestry artists. So we were very targeted in our plan of who to visit and how. But that was a trip, and the succeeding trips also added to it, of such immense discovery and more questions than we knew what to deal with. Why do you have at the Wawel Castle in Krakow, Poland, why do you have the biggest collection of Flemish tapestries in the world? That was an enormous surprise to me. And the stock answer for it, well, they spoke French at the Polish court. Yeah, right. But so what? How does that work? At any rate, the tapestry weaving has been a very rich source of insight for us.
Yes, and it's always interesting to me how these tapestries, the secular ones, have survived because there's stories about finding it in a barn. That applies to both to the Lady and the Unicorn tapestry series and the Hunt for the Unicorn tapestries. And so a barn, and you vision the red barn that we see in the United States, but no, these are old stone buildings and they may have been there for centuries. And why did somebody hide the tapestry in the barn? Well, because it probably would have been destroyed. And why? Because maybe it contains information about medicinal herbs and plants. Maybe it's talking about a mythology that doesn't line up with the church mythology. Uh, Things of that sort. It's documented that a technique or a practice of invading Christians was to destroy the local writings. That happened in Mexico, that happened in the Philippines. It certainly happened in Europe.
The women in the tapestries and the Lady and the Unicorn tapestries have been talked about in terms of noble ladies and their servants. But in looking at Celtic culture that was classless, that's my theory, and I see that borne out again and again. These women were teaching their apprentices because that's the way education happens. They're all clad in fabrics that are very richly woven brocades. The depiction of these fabrics is stunning, as well as the way these women are wearing them, and even in the vineyards, in the tapestry that shows wine production from start to finish and tasting in the vineyards and the barrels and the crush and gathering the grapes in the baskets. All those aspects are done by people who are beautifully shown. Life in those days was not barbaric, and we see that again and again. And to dismiss the entire Celtic world in one word of barbarism does a terrific injustice to this people who were very accomplished. An illuminated manuscript can have all different kinds of meanings. It has been thought, and the way I learned about illuminated manuscripts was that it started by the illumination of the first letter on the script. With an O, for example, it's very, very beautifully presented. But the illuminated manuscripts that we're seeing from this 15th century library in Brussels that was spirited away and kept under wraps for centuries and then surfaced like in the 1900s, those illuminations are berries and vines and flowers and animals and people and scenes, beautifully, beautifully done. The writing is almost, well, it is integrated into the scene of these illuminations. So it acts as a great enhancement to what the writing is talking about.
In France, near the Roman founded town of Autun, is the Celtic town of Bibrac that was a hilltop oppidum, a rich place, an important place, and actually the place where Julius Caesar went after the Battle of Alesia to write his report that we now know begins "All Gaul is divided into 3 parts." This was a place of workshops, of egalitarian buildings. There are reconstructions there in the museum of the dwellings themselves where any one of us today could step in and know how to use the tools and live there. This was not a group of people living on the fringes. This was a successful, dynamic culture, and we've found that it spread across Europe to sites in Slovenia, in Austria, France, Germany, all across Europe. And we know there's more. There's Spain, there's further north. And remember, too, we often see local people who are knowledgeable when we're out on the field because there's an interest in the Celtic history that is that the population holds, or some members of the population. I remember that one hill fort in Germany that took us a little time to actually to locate and find our way in. It was marvelous with the ponds that had been built, but we found a young family and spoke with the young man there who was well versed in the local history of the Celtic, and he was a forester, and he said, in time you get to the point where you can look around a landscape at the hills, and you can say, that's going to be one where there's a hill fort. And he says he's generally right when he follows up on that.
I'm remembering Madeleneberg in Austria and the wonderful people who were running the Gasthaus there. The woman, when we came back, we were going to have lunch, and she was a one-person operation with running the place and cooking too. She was the one who said, "Did you see that head of the woman in the museum?" And we had not. So we went back in and found it and filmed it, and that is hugely important because this woman is absolutely beautiful. She looks very Egyptian in her headdress, which is a very interesting tie. I think we tend to underestimate the range of the Celtic world, and we're only beginning to scratch the surface on seeing what's involved with it. But this woman, too, brought out all the books on the local area, and I was able to photograph them, if you remember. So we got information that we never would have had otherwise, because those books aren't for sale. They were older books, but they contain a wealth of information and really show the the significance of what we're really looking at. This was a place, if you remember too, that had gold mines.
Yes, I do remember it had the gold mines, and I was going to mention just that this had been a Celtic mine, that when the Romans got into that part of southern Austria, it took it over, and had constructed other facilities there to expand the workings, but it was a place where gold was recovered and smelted. And this was not so easily accessible because it was high up on a mountainside. So it would have been laborious to move anything up and down that hill. But that was the mine, that was the production center of that gold. And it was taken over by Romans from Celts.
The arches that were there and the layout of that community along the hillside was really beautiful. And I remember also that there was a very sophisticated system of channeling water for the baths that was in one section. But the work on the arches was fabulous masonry that was exhibited in that. And the just the beauty of looking over that landscape from the mountaintop, even in the rain, was just a magical thing. Plus, you really had to admire the people who were running it, even the museum itself, because as I recall, it was like a Sunday morning that we were there, and there she was, and very helpful, giving all kinds of information to us, and then the woman in the guest house too. So you got the sense that these people were there to preserve, that this was not just a little extra money for them. They were committed to preserving that spot for a variety of different reasons, partly because it was their heritage.
Another thing we found as we have looked at the grave sites is the formal burials of some people along with wagons and with an elaborate set of other objects in the tomb, which might be underground. But the wagons in particular, four-wheeled wagons, they may have carried the deceased to that burial site, but then they were taken apart and put in the grave with the person. And this is not just a one-off thing. This is all across Europe. We also spoke to an archaeologist in Titelberg in southern Luxembourg, where there was active archaeological work ongoing. This is a large oppidum on a hilltop. And one of the interesting things that they had discovered was a festival hall that had been enlarged at least 4 times based on the rebuilding the foundations, always on about the same spot. And clearly this was an important building. Clearly a lot went on there. Clearly it had not become a church, as far as anyone could tell.
Another aspect of Titelberg was the marketplace. They had cellars there for keeping wares, and also the baths. They had built ponds further out, and a beautiful overlook of the valley. In conclusion, I'd just like to say this. Tapestry started us out on this quest to see Celtic Europe and has led us to the era before Christianity. In the Iron Age, we were finding a commonality that traces all the way to the present. We're dealing with 1,400 years of heresy laws that destroyed secular art and literature. The church state used force and fear to keep people subservient and suppress their identity. In spite of that, it is still possible to detect the fabric woven by Celtic men and women that holds Europe together. Please help us search for Europe's secret past.